All right, let's talk about inflation. It's a word you hear constantly, on the news, from politicians, maybe even over the dinner table. But what does it actually mean? And more importantly, why does it feel like it's constantly messing with your wallet? Let's break it all down.
You know that feeling, right? You go to the grocery store and the same cart of food costs way more than it did last year. Or you fill up your car and the number on the pump just keeps climbing. That feeling of your money shrinking? Well, that's not just a feeling. It has a name, and it's exactly what we're going to get into.
So, first things first, let's get a really solid handle on what we're actually talking about. What is this economic force that makes our money feel, well, less powerful?
At its core, it's pretty straightforward. Inflation is just the gradual rise in the average price of everything. When that happens, each dollar, or whatever currency you use, simply buys a little less than it did before. It's not about just one thing getting pricier, it's about a general, economy-wide increase.
Now, you might hear a few similar sounding words thrown around, so let's clear them up real quick. Inflation is prices going up. Deflation is the opposite. Prices are going down. That might sound awesome, but it can actually be a total disaster for an economy. Then you have disinflation. This one's a little tricky. It just means inflation is slowing down. So if inflation was 5% and now it's 3%, prices are still rising, just not as fast. See the difference?
And if you think inflation is just a modern headache, you couldn't be more wrong. This has been a thing for, well, basically as long as we've had money. For one of the best examples, we've got to go way, way back in time.
Picture ancient Rome. The government needs more money to pay for its huge armies and big projects. So what do? They start debasing their coins. They'd take a silver coin, melt it down, mix in some cheaper stuff like copper, and then mint a bunch more coins. The problem? Each new coin had less actual silver in it, so it was worth less. People quickly caught on, and soon it took way more coins to buy the same loaf of bread. Prices shot through the roof.
Okay, so if inflation is this general rise in prices across the board, how in the world do we actually measure it? I mean, you can't just track the price of every single thing, right?
Well, we have a tool for that. And the most famous one is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The best way to think about it is like a giant imaginary shopping basket. This basket is filled with all the stuff a typical family buys. We're talking everything from groceries and gasoline to rent and a new pair of shoes. The CPI just tracks the total cost of that exact same basket month after month, year after year. When you hear inflation is up 3%, it just means the cost of that whole basket went up 3%. You'll also hear about core inflation.
So how do they figure out what goes in the basket? It's a huge job. Statisticians survey thousands and thousands of households to get a super detailed picture of what we're all spending our money on. Based on that data, they build this representative basket. Then every month, people literally go out and check the prices of all those items. They add it all up, compare it to the last month, and that's how we get our inflation number. And by the way, they update what's in the basket over time, adding things like streaming services and taking out stuff we don't really use anymore.
And this gives you a great idea of what that basket looks like. You can see right away that not everything is equal. Housing is the biggest slice of the pie by far, because for most of us, that's our biggest expense. That means a change in rent prices is going to have a much bigger impact on the final inflation number than, say, the price of bananas.
All right, we know what it is and how we measure it, but what actually causes it in the first place? This is where things get really interesting, because it's one of the biggest debates in economics.
Generally, economists split it into two main camps. First, there's demand pull. This is the classic too much money chasing too few goods scenario. The economy is hot, everyone's spending, and demand is so high that businesses can just jack up their prices. Then you have cost push. This is when it gets more expensive to make things. Think about a sudden spike in the price of oil or a big disruption to supply chains. Businesses have to pay more for their materials, and they pass those higher costs right on to us.
But there's another really powerful idea, summed up perfectly by the famous economist Milton Friedman. He argued that, at the end of the day, significant inflation is always caused by one thing: the government printing too much money. His point was that if the amount of money in an economy grows faster than the amount of stuff to buy, that money will just become less valuable.
Today, most economists see it as a combination of these ideas, often called the triangle model. It says you need to look at three things. You have demand shocks, like a huge increase in spending. You have supply shocks, like that oil crisis we talked about. And then there's this really important third piece: expectations. If everyone thinks prices are going to go up, what do? They ask for raises and start buying stuff now before it gets more expensive.
which of course causes prices to go up. It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now this might sound crazy, but inflation isn't all bad. Seriously, economists will tell you it actually has some positive effects alongside the obvious negative ones. So let's look at both sides of the coin. Okay, the bad stuff is pretty easy to see. It chews away at the value of your savings. It's especially tough on people with fixed incomes, like retirees. And high, unpredictable inflation makes it really hard for businesses to plan for the future. But the good? Well, a little bit of steady inflation actually encourages people to invest their money or spend it rather than just hoarding cash that's losing value. And crucially, it gives central banks room to work. If interest rates are at 3% and inflation is 2%, a central bank can cut rates to boost the economy. But if everything is at 0, they're kind of stuck. And here's a real-world look at how it eats away at your money. Let's say you have $1,000 tucked away. If inflation just chugs along at a pretty normal 2% a year, in 5 years, that $1,000 will only buy you what about $905 buys today. It's like a slow, silent tax on your savings. So, if this is such a powerful force in our economy, who's in charge? Who's got their hands on the steering wheel trying to keep this thing from getting out of control? That job falls to a country's central bank. In the US, it's the Federal Reserve. Their main weapon is the interest rate. When they want to cool down inflation, they raise interest rates. That makes it more expensive to borrow money for a car or a house, so people and businesses spend less and the economy slows down. If they want to stimulate the economy, they do the opposite. They lower rates. It's a constant balancing act.
And this gets us to the big consensus. After decades of experiments and learning some hard lessons, pretty much every major central bank has decided on a target. That target is almost always right around 2%. It's seen as the sweet spot, low enough that it doesn't cause too many problems, but high enough to keep the gears of the economy greased and avoid the dangers.
Which leads to the final billion-dollar question. What's the perfect number? Is 2% really the right answer for everyone, all the time?
You know, at the end of the day, the goal isn't 0. A little inflation is actually healthy. The real goal is stability. It's about finding that Goldilocks rate, not too hot, not too cold, but just right. A predictable world where businesses can invest and you can plan for your future without constantly worrying about the value of your money evaporating.